So welcome to the Rick Bisson Podcast, episode 17. And today I'd like to follow up on our most recent podcast, which was Judge Not. And I had a particular experience come up that really tied to that whole topic. And it's just amazing how that came about. So a friend, mutual friend of a friend, highly respected, recently was discovered that they've been having an affair and that they're leaving their spouse and moving on. And many people have tried to reconcile this, and this particular individual has just decided to move on. And I can just, so a very well-respected friend told me this, and I could just feel the judgment on the person who was leaving. And being a fixer that I am, I'm immediately jumping to which side, not necessarily which side, but fixing the problem. This person who's telling me this story is devastated by this event that's taken place. And, I want to fix their problem. And I want to say to them, well, I appreciate that this is difficult for everybody, and there are always two sides to every story. And what's come to mind more and more about this is, Jesus with the woman that was caught in adultery. And here are these
accusers,
thank you, who are going to stone her because that was the way. And, Jesus confronts them and says, who of you has not sinned, you may cast the first stone. And then what does he do? They all leave because no one is in a position to do that. And this woman is left standing there with nobody left. And Jesus doesn't just cast her off or doesn't just send her away. He says, and for you, go and sin no more. And, how, the Pharisees, the leaders of that time, they couldn't handle that because that was against the law, basically the law that they had lived under. And it's so interesting today, 2,000 plus years later, we're still judging people. Where does the forgiveness come in? And where does the ability for that person who, for whatever reason, right, wrong, or indifferent, deserves our love and respect? And I mean, it's going to be devastating for all the people involved in this. It always is. And this is someone who won't say celebrity status. Her decision will impact people greatly. And how will that lesson get portrayed? Could it possibly be portrayed in a way that this is a lesson to learn from, not a lesson to judge from? The consequences of your actions always play out, plus or minus. And for these people that are impacted, how could they possibly make this a more positive experience to teach people, that these things can happen? And it just goes on and on from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can learn from good examples. You can also learn from bad examples.
Absolutely.
And, you don't have to touch the stove in order to know it's hot. You can watch someone else do it and go, I'm not going to be touching the stove.
It's funny you say that because I have had so many people recently use that hot stove. It's the perfect one, but I never used it. I never thought about it, but it's...
And I've always said that I'm someone that, like, you tell me the stove is hot, and I'm like, I'm going to find out.
Mm-hmm.
And there are other times where I know I'm not going to find out.
Wouldn't that be a fun question when you first meet somebody? Are you a touch the stove kind of person?
Yeah.
Or are you the kind that says, oh, no, can't touch that, it's hot.
Right.
And you don't really know it's hot.
Right. Well, there's so many times where tell me I can't is a strength. Or, someone says that can't be done, or there's no way you can do X, Y, or Z, or and that, like, someone tells me that you can't do whatever, I'm like, okay, I'm definitely going to do it then.
Yeah.
I'm going to prove you wrong.
Yeah.
And there's times when someone says you shouldn't do that, and you want to listen, or you watch someone, do something foolish or whatever. And I mean, I have made so many mistakes in my life that now when I talk to teenagers or college kids, I'm like, here's where you want to slow down and here's where you want to speed up. You know, like making connections with people and learning from them, asking good questions, like perfect that skill. And then like having fun, partying or making poor choices, like you want to limit that as much as possible.
Because consequences on the negative side can create regrets. And how can you... I've had the goal to limit the regrets. You know, can I keep them off my one hand? Okay, maybe I can keep them off of my two hands.
Right.
Okay, I'm on my feet now.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
But how do you eliminate those or limit those regrets as much as possible?
Yeah, and there is a sense in which you have to, like, you've been told your whole life you need to do X, Y, and Z and not do, you know, A, B, and C, and you have to kind of find that out for yourself. And that doesn't mean you have to do it, but you go and you watch people do it, and you're like, wow, yeah, that really is a slippery slope or whatever. But yeah, I think that the small things are where maybe you can afford to touch the stove. You know, if you touch the stove and it burns your finger, okay, maybe you can touch the stove and it's not a big deal. But if you touch the stove and your arm disappears, like you're not going to touch the stove, or you're going to want to avoid it. And there are things that have, you know, long-lasting consequences, and that's really, I mean, driving too fast on a motorcycle. Like that's something where, like, if I could go back, I would say to myself, you know, this is something that, you know, you could not only end your life but someone else's life if you're passing and you cause a 3-car accident or whatever. It's like, okay, that's touching the stove and your whole arm falls off. Whereas, you know, the little things, whatever those are, you know, I have a million examples of those that, you know, it's like, okay, you're going to learn, you know, starting a new business, not a bad thing. You know, that's kind of touching the stove. Like, oh, this market, you think there's opportunity here and someone tells you there's not, or it's going to be more difficult than you think, or this is why you should do this instead. Well, if you try and fail, it's worth it.
Right.
You're going to learn a ton along the way. You know, sometimes it's good to not listen to people. I know a lot of people who are very successful that were crazy on day one, and now everyone talks about how they knew them back in the day. You know? Yeah. So.
Well, I like to say that can't is one of my favorite 4-letter words, and it has a little apostrophe on it.
Yeah.
So just to accent it a little bit.
Yeah.
Tell me I can't.
Yeah. Yeah. I always tell you in the business that you can't sell that house. Right. It's overpriced, or it's got some issue
for some reason or other,
for whatever it is. Yeah. And we've shown it and no one's made an offer or whatever. I'm like, man, you can't sell that house. And you always do.
That's my job.
Yeah.
So today's topic, outside of recapping that a little bit, thanks folks for listening to that. So topic, halftime. And if you describing that a little bit more. So looking at our lives and sort of the length of our life, breaking that up into different pieces and starting off kind of looking at it from a halftime perspective. And we'll carry that analogy a little bit more into, you know, basically the 4 quarters of a football game, let's say, or whatever quarters you want to play. And it doesn't have to be quarters. It could be thirds. It could be whatever.
If you're a hockey player.
Yeah, or a wrestler. It's three periods, which is, I was really trying to, okay, how do I make this 3 periods? That's all I want. Yeah. It wouldn't be basketball.
Not for us. We're way too short.
Right. So, but your halftime in life. So let's kind of follow the normal course of events. A lot of people are going to kind of pick their late 40s, early 50s as kind of a halftime in life where all of a sudden it's like, okay, I've done the first half. I played that out. Now it's time to start the second. And what did I learn from the first half that I'm going to carry into the second half or change in the second half? And, you know, when you look at it's not the same for everybody because of certain situations that I'll talk about. The timing of each, let's say you're born and you're 20. That's a developmental period in most people's life. Some people may discover what they want to do in their 20s to 40s earlier on in that time frame. Some people won't discover it until late in that or even in the next phase. So there's 0 to 20. Then you take 21 to 40. And then you're going to take 41 to 60. And then 61 till the end, till you're gone from here and resurrected to someplace else. So, when you look at your first phase there, the first quarter, 0 to 20, parent influence, hopefully peers, education, foundations, extracurricular activities that start to make you who you are, socialize you. You become the person that you want to become. You start to set, as you go along, you start to set some standards for yourself, how you want to live, how you want to be. And then, 21 to 40, you're in many cases, you'll start to form relationships and you'll start to form responsibilities. And in that period of time, hectic, typically, in my own case, we started having you kids. I was 23, I was 30 when Juliet was born. I might have been, Mom was, that's right. I think I was 28 when Juliet was born, or 28 or 29. So 4 kids, work, life, balance, just a ton going on. And you're taking what you had in that first quarter and you're using it in that second quarter, and you're oftentimes scrambling. And you're making decisions on the fly a lot of times about what's most important. Well, not necessarily on the fly of what's most important, but there's just so much less time for contemplation, for reflection. You're in a doing phase. You're really doing a lot. And you've got to determine, it's mostly relationships and responsibilities. And the relationships are the people, and the responsibilities are work. You got to pay the bills, and how much you're going to, the effort you put into both of those or one of those. Where's the balance come from? And if you're out of balance, or even if you're balanced, you could be tipping the scale in a bad way. And many people will choose the work responsibility as the one thing that they're going to focus on. And I'm of the opinion that if you can focus on the relationship side, if that's a spouse, if you're, fortunate enough to have children, then that's where the focus should be, because the work will follow. And so that's the first half, and if you're fortunate as you start to have children, or relationships. I guess it can come from relationships, because I'm talking most about my own experience. If you've got relationships, then that will start to re-solidify, or you'll start to evaluate as you get to the end of that second quarter more about what's important. You'll have more time to think, partly because the people that you're with, either working with or that you're in a relationship with, you'll be thinking more about how you're relating with them and what are you bringing to the table. So that's the first half. And what do you do at halftime? But what do the football teams do at halftime?
Pep
talk, evaluate,
rest, sabbatical.
Yep. They've got 15 minutes.
Right.
Which, when you look at the game, 4 quarters, 15 minutes apiece. So you got an extra quarter almost in there. Mm-hmm. Rough math, but right. You got an extra quarter in there to evaluate, mm-hmm. assess, mm-hmm. rest, be critical. Look at the films. What have I done? How have we played? Mm-hmm. How has the other team played? and how do we have to react
Yeah.
for the second half? I mean, so many times if you're a football fan and you watch the games, the second half for one team or the other can be a completely new game. It's like a brand new start.
It's a pattern interrupt because you get in these grooves. Like if you people talk about this, you imagine a sledding hill. There's a fresh snow, and then you sled down the hill. 10 times, a groove forms. 100 times, like the whole thing is tracked up, and you have your grooves, and you're not getting out of them. Like if you get in a groove, you're going in that direction
100
to the
miles
bottom.
an hour.
100 miles an hour to the bottom hill. So if you're in a losing mindset for the first quarter, well, the second quarter is probably going to carry out the same. It's going to be hard to break that in a huddle or something like that. But you get people in a locker room, you give them a second to breathe, catch their breath, give the speech that, changes their mindset about who they are and where they come from and what this is about. Get back to the why rather than, just run the ball, run the ball. That's like the what, which is like not going to motivate you, especially when you're getting smashed every time. And so that pattern interrupt allows them to come back. And maybe the other team who was doing awesome is walking out going, we got this. Haven't connected with their why, haven't connected with who they are. And then, it swings the other direction. So I get the impression that a lot of our listeners, the few loyal listeners that we have already, are in two demographics. They're either close to my age because they're seeing me share it, or they're close to your age, or maybe a little older than you. Because I would say the people that you know are your age and older, whereas the people I know are almost my age and younger. So this halftime, I mean, you had kids pretty young, so most people maybe are a little behind you, if anything, but you're 60, so let's say halftime was 50 for you. It maybe is 60 for other people. So you're in halftime.
I'm not in halftime. I'm beyond halftime.
Well, yeah.
I'm in my third quarter.
Your demographic is somewhere around halftime, or they're in the last act.
Actually, in my fourth quarter. Sorry.
You are not in your fourth quarter. I refute that statement. But some people are. Some people that are listening are in their fourth quarter, the last act.
Yeah.
And that's okay. We all start as babies and end as elderly folks. And
the beauty of being in whichever act you're in is that you're in it.
Right.
And something I wanted to say is that you may be on a trajectory to fit into these, 0 to 20, 21 to 40, 41 to 60, 61 to resurrection. You might not, because of reasons that you know or reasons you don't know. Tragedy can strike any time, and all of a sudden your plan is just thrown out because of something that happened to someone else or to you, and all of a sudden your halftime has become 6 months, 6 years, whatever the prognosis might be, or just a complete reevaluation of, I don't know anymore.
Yeah.
And that really puts things in perspective. So, this is general terms. It's just kind of an outline of the normal course of events, I guess is what I'll say.
Yeah.
But you were starting to ask a question.
So for the people listening, maybe they're experiencing halftime, or they're beyond halftime, or they're in the final chapter, or people like me who are like quarter one, we're either getting clobbered or things are going really well, but maybe the train's moving faster than we expected. You kind of talked about the work-life balance. Maybe things are going really well at work, but like, geesh, I don't see my wife, and like, my kids have everything they want, but I don't see them, or the opposite.
Right.
I spend a lot of time with my family. It's awesome, but I'm not having the career success that I want to have, or I want to provide more for my family without, sacrificing all my time with them. But there is some extra time there maybe that I could do whatever, or use my time more efficiently and more strategically in order to move ahead on my trajectory. But you came in to today not to talk about, 30-year-olds in the first quarter. I'm not saying we can't get into that, but you came to talk about halftime.
Yeah, I really, it was both.
Okay.
I was really thinking about both, all of them, because I've been in the first half, and I'm in the second half.
Right.
And so...
Whereas I'm not in the second half. Like, I don't know what it's like to experience.
And it's
experience
amazing
halftime.
because I think most people would relate to this, that it is almost a switch that turns. And actually, so a lot of what I'm putting forth, how it's organized, is from a book by Bob Buford, which is called Halftime. And I read that book when I was about 50. And it was just the timing. I also, John Maxwell, Intentional Living, about the same time frame. And those two things connected so well. Bob Buford's book is actually, the subtitle is Moving from Success to Significance. And that was so, it just tied things down for me so tightly at that point in time in my life, that what was success? Well, what more success am I going to get? Or I'm not going to put success at the expense of the significance that I can leave, because I've always been very focused on, legacy to some extent, much more focused on that as kind of a one thing now, yet throughout life, it's, what kind of influence am I having that might create, some exposure for other people to want to be the best of themselves that they can be.
Right. So what are some things that you, like, for someone who's, let's say someone's listening and they're like coming up on halftime, or they're like walking into the locker room, what are some things that you learned either from those books or just off the top of your head, some thoughts that you have about, like, okay, you're in the locker room. What are you thinking? What are you saying to, like, get fired up for the next 50 years? Or, at halftime, you don't know, like you said before, you don't know if you're going to get to finish the game. You might get injured, get pulled out. Someone might not make it through the game. It's like super fun to play a game with someone and they're side by side with you. Then that person gets injured and your, lineman isn't there to block for you. It's like, it's not so fun anymore.
Your best friend in the most important game of the year, the last game of the year against your rival, gets injured in the first offensive play.
And your world is rocked.
And your world is rocked. And you know what we all did? We all said, we're going to do it for him.
Yeah. So what are some thoughts that you have around people entering halftime?
Yeah, people entering halftime, there's not, how much difference is there? Well, I guess maybe it's a more sophisticated review of your past and where you want to go in the future. Because it's the same process. It's self-evaluation. It's, what am I here for? What is my work for? What are my relationships for? What do I want? I think the bigger shift here is just, what am I leaving behind? Because you realize that there's an end more than you do earlier. But you're still, like you were in your first quarter, you're saying, who am I? I'm in high school, and these are the things that I stand for. You make those decisions then you either affirm or adjust those in the second quarter to some extent. It's just that the halftime is a bigger, more, you're going much deeper to find out what are you going to do, because there's more of an end game in mind. And you have more time to think about it. You have more time to influence how that decision goes. So I think it's a little different, but it's also the same. And so for somebody who's in their first half, what is my life's work for? What purpose do I have? What are my strengths, and how can I best use my strengths that I can be the best of myself, that I can then bring that best self to others and help them be their best self. I think that's an awful lot of, and that's that's in your responsibilities. It's in your relationships. It goes into everything.
Okay.
Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I'm probably going to ask some follow-ups.
great.
But so you talked about like having significance over success.
And if I could just,
Yeah, go ahead.
success is so often cornered into business, financial success, and I would challenge that success is happiness, and success is fulfillment, and you gain fulfillment from being happy in what you're doing. And in the first half, I think it's harder to there's so much activity, there's so much chaos, we could call it, that you're bumping along, and you've got happy moments for sure. It's a little harder to sort of recognize the happiness, not recognize it. You're in it, you're living it. In the second half, there's much more deliberate intention in terms of, because in your second half, you all of a sudden have time to say, this is what I'm going to do today or tomorrow or the next year or the next 5 years, because your responsibilities to, I'll say other people, but typically it's family, they change, and you don't have that. I mean,
Right.
when you guys moved out of the house, it probably took us 4 or 5 years to kind of figure out, yes, we're still very involved in your lives. However, you need your own space and your own things to do. So happy to have you around whenever you can be and want you to be. Yet, now we reflect a little bit more on how we spend our time
together as
a couple.
Yeah.
And who else we spend time with. It's
right.
primarily all of you.
Right.
And who else?
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know if this is worth getting into, but I'll just go into it a little bit too, to kind of talk about the difference between the first half and the second half.
Mm-hmm.
The first half, like you may not see it, but like what you're doing is like building compound interest in all things. Your finances, you squirrel away a little bit of money that earns interest, and later in life, maybe you don't have to work. Like that's like the most simple concept of compound interest that people get. The sooner you start squirreling that money away, the faster it grows. You build momentum and velocity, and people that have done that or put away a lot of money, could be early or not, and later in life they have more money. They've like done analysis on Warren Buffett versus the rest of the investor market, and Warren Buffett is so successful and is, the number one guy, not because he gets the best returns, but because he's been doing it the longest. And so the sooner in life you focus on, put away partying or put away chasing empty things, and you pursue meaningful relationships, and you're going to see that person just has an amazing life for longer. They're probably healthier, So compound interest applies to other things as well. It applies to your business. You start the business sooner, that's a huge advantage. Your family, you get married young. Instead of having, 10 years together, you have 30 years together at, 60 instead of getting married at 50. And that's not to say that everyone should get married young. It's just a fact of, the situation. If you happen to find that, I wanted to find that person at 20. I didn't. I found that person at 25. I wanted to have kids at 23. That's not the case. Okay. But
that's why I think these quarters kind of come in different places.
Totally.
Great friend who got married at 40, had his first child at 41
totally.
or 42, I think maybe, different paths.
Totally.
But
right.
And that's the way
and the
it's
focus
meant to be.
was different in that situation where
Right.
like financially squared away, yes. Young kids, yes. Financially squared away, maybe not, So maybe there's a blending of the two, or you get to pick your focus, and this is your, write your own story kind of situation. But, 4 children for you and my mom are, the effect of compound interest. Grandchildren are the effect of compound interest. These are all things that have compounded over time, that like choosing to do life with one person and invest in the 4 human assets that you create from that, and then watch them grow up and create their own assets. Like you don't get grandchildren if you don't have kids.
Right.
Like you planted seeds, you sowed seeds, you invested in the market of children, and therefore you reap the rewards of grandchildren, great-grandchildren someday. And whether you're here or not, great-great-grandchildren. And that's a long-winded way of explaining that in your first half,
by the way, you could probably drop a mic on that explanation because that was really good.
I listen to a lot of different people talk about different things. So me saying anything like this is hardly ever original idea. However,
because we stand on the shoulders of giants.
Totally, right. So just to say that in your first half, you're trying to build momentum. You're trying to build velocity. You're trying to, in the Bible it says, economists call it the Matthew principle. It says, to those who have much, more will be given. To those who have nothing, everything will be taken away. And that's some people are always thrown off by that. I believe that to be Jesus just saying a truth about the world, that people that are rich will get richer, people that are poor will stay poor. That, and that's not to say there isn't upward mobility or an ability to change. It's like if you can grab as much, it's true in physics. If an object has more matter, it attracts more matter. The reason the Earth rotates around the sun is because the sun is so big and dense. So it attracts things towards it. If you can put a pile of money aside, it'll earn interest. If you make the pile bigger, it will earn more interest. If you can have good relationships, if I know 3 people really well, they'll introduce me to other people. If I only know one person really well, I have one person introducing me to people. If I know 100 people, I have 100 people introducing me to people. And so with this, in your first half, you're trying to get as big as possible. You're trying to, establish relationships that are meaningful. More isn't always better, but really meaningful relationships. You're trying to establish a career. The sooner you invest in your career, a high school student that does nothing all summer, that's fine. Right. That's their option. Or a high school student that works a job at, Home Depot, or a high school student who goes and starts their own lawn care business. Like those are going to be 3 very different, you're compounding experience. You're building up experience that will then affect you in your 30s. And then in your 30s, what you do in your 30s, will affect you when you do hit halftime and you go, man, I really invested in myself and it's paid off so much. Or man, I wish I started sooner, which we all feel about many different things. But so the first half is compounding. I don't even know what the second half is. I mean, halftime is reflection. Halftime is an opportunity to change your mindset, change your actions. I get that, but I don't know what it's like to be on the second, and I don't know how far I am through my life. But if you imagine 100-year life as, what you're going to live, I don't even know what it's like to be in the second half.
Well, it's very interesting because in this book, he talks about the second half being riskier than the first half. And I struggle with that because to me, the risk is in the first half. The risk, the exposure to me is bigger in the first half because you're building, you're making decisions, it just seems like the consequences could be so much greater because whatever you're doing right there so greatly impacts the second half. However, we talked about regrets earlier, and that's something that he said, when you're at halftime and you're in that locker room, you have to put the regrets away. They're past. Move on. Don't let them impact you. You've got to make a decision that this is what I'm going to do going forward. And those regrets may drive that. They may just be over and gone. But I thought that was great advice, And just like in your first half, who are you around? Who are your mentors? Reevaluate who that is. Find somebody who can help you, someone who's going to be really honest and, give you some direction on where you're going. typically, when you get to that in the second half or at that halftime, at halftime, you're more open to people, listening to people, coaching and things like that tends to be easier maybe at that point in time. And again, it's all depends on where you are along those plays. And I would also say, don't wait till the second half because you're formulating throughout both halves and all the time. And for me, I remember when I read Rick Warren's book, The Purpose-Driven Life. That's just such a great map for what's most important. And easy to read, easy to follow through. And, for me, it was faith, family, and friends. That's what came out of that. Had it been any different before that? No. It just allowed me to put it into 3 simple words so that was my easy solution to any question or anything. And, what other resources can you find either in the first or second half that are going to help you really pinpoint? And again, it's really, what is my life's work for? Not just being this or that. It's, in the end, what is my life's work for? And it leads up to wherever your life ends. And we're all going to exit here. And if you're going to exit tomorrow, what did you do today? If you're going to exit in 25 years from now, what did you do in those 25 years?
Right.
It starts fresh every day.
Right. And really, like, if you plot out 25 years, well, what do you want to accomplish in 25 years? Well, I want to do this. Okay, if it gets cut short by 5 years or 24 years and 364 days, like if you started today and you were, at your end, you wouldn't be thinking, man, I wish I'd done more, or I wish I'd started. The only reason you're going to feel you wish you started is if whatever time you meet your end, whether it's tomorrow or in 25 years, is if you didn't try, if you didn't, go for it, do the thing. I really want to kind of drill into, I'm imagining someone listening that's your age or older. They've accomplished a lot. They've kind of lived their life in a certain way. I don't want to say anything about being over the hill or anything like that, but I feel like that's a threat for people is you're not done until you're done. You're not done running the race. What the 75-year-old who's older than you, who has more to give this world. What do you say to them? How do you reinvent? I don't even know what it's like to be that age, I think about you. I think about my father-in-law, who are huge influences on me in a positive way. And, my father-in-law is always doing something new or building something.
I'm fixing to do something.
Oh, yeah. He is always fixing to do something. And I just so much respect that. I don't even really know how to ask the question, but what do you say to that person who's at that age and they need a change, or they they can feel this thing calling on them, I've got more to give. What do you do? What do you say to that person?
Well, I think a lot comes from what they have been exposed to. There are people who, I'm working until I'm 65, and then at 65, I envision myself in that recliner right there watching TV, and that's going to make me happy. Or that's what I want to do. So I think it depends, largely on, to some extent, that it's really setting a vision for what you're going to be doing, and so in halftime or in the third or last quarter, it's looking ahead to what you're going to be. And so for me at 60, I look at the 75-year-old, and what's different? Not very much. I'm still active, riding a bike, doing things on the water, finding something new to do.
To clarify, you're saying when you imagine yourself at 75.
When I imagine
who
myself
are you?
at 75,
Got
who
it.
am I? So I think that's a lot of it is what's my vision for myself in the future, and always be looking ahead. We underestimate where we're going to be in 5 years, and we completely overestimate where we're going to be in 1 year. So having that little bit longer perspective, and if you don't get there for circumstances that come up, you don't, but you've got that vision of where you can be. And 75 years from now, so
When you're 75.
when I'm 70, yeah,
75 years from now, neither of us will be here
yeah, I'm working on that.
without some serious advances in medical science.
So I'm 75, so that is 15 years from now. So you are 46, almost 47 then? Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're almost 47. And your sister's grandchildren are going to be 22.
My sister's children.
Your sister's children. Thank you for correcting me. Your sister's children will be 22. And there'll be another set of grandchildren that will be 15 years old. So what am I doing at 75 with those people in my life? The same things that I'm doing right now. The goal is not to stop.
Right.
And if it's a little limited, okay, maybe it means that I can't go out and ski for 4 hours. I ski for 3 hours or an hour or whatever it happens to be, but I'm participating in activities.
You can at least show up, be on the side of the hill, and watch them go down, and then ski home.
Right.
Like that's
That's a win.
That's a win.
And, I've watched people do that. And that's the other thing, to have mentors. Sometimes they're not mentors. They're just people who you look at and say, I want to be like that.
Yeah.
Bill Haggett. I don't know if he stopped skiing yet, and he's your grandfather's age. But I remembered him when he was, he looked like an old man. He's probably 60 then. And he's out there skiing, and I'm like, wow, I want to do that.
Yeah.
Because he wasn't just on skis, on the side of the hill. He was skiing.
To prove that you're old, in case you needed further evidence, at 60, I remember when I still hear people will describe how you showed up in the terrain park at Sugarloaf and would like hit jumps, and he'd be like, yeah, he was like 40 and like would just pull up and go crazy, like boost off this jump. And I'm like, oh, okay, so 40's old,
right.
And you're 20 years beyond that.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I mean, you would probably hit a jump today,
sure.
but like,
I have,
yeah, it wouldn't be the same as it was back
Right.
then, obviously. But like, the goal isn't to be, I am not going to snowboard like I did at 17. Like if I did that, I'd have to put everything into it. It would be a nightmare, and it wouldn't be worth it. If the goal is not to do what you've always done and not like recede at all.
Mm-hmm.
The goal is to do more than you would if you didn't try, to be better than you should be at your current age.
Mm-hmm.
Like at 40, you were a better skier than you should have been. Like you were taking risks that someone else wouldn't take. At 60, you should be like, oh my gosh, like he's 60, he can still keep up with us and ski powder for, 5 hours. Like, yeah, does he pass out on the couch for an hour afterwards and like it takes a week to recover? Sure. But like you can still do it, to some extent.
That's some compounded interest on that, by the way.
Yeah.
Definitely some compounded interest.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I mean, you don't really, the more I watch you kind of like fight age, and not like in a denial sense, but in a like, okay, like this is my new opponent is not, the mountain. It's not, a fighter or a boxer or the other team. It's time. It's complacency. It's atrophy. I watch you or hear about and imagine you waking up every morning and being like, I am not going to be slow. I am not going to be old. I'm not going to be, like we said in a previous episode, the goal is to die as late as possible, as young as you can, right?
Mm-hmm.
To die young as late as possible.
To die as young as late as possible.
Yeah. So like to be, I think about my friend Kenny Chamberlain, who is a Vietnam War vet. He's 70. He just turned 78. When I first got my sauna, this was like when I kind of started to get to know Kenny, was when I bought my first house, and I bought a sauna, which I shouldn't have done. Like, didn't make any sense, but I was like, I heard it was like good and, prevented aging, and was like, sweet, let's do this. And I went to Finland.
You had experience with sauna.
I went to Finland and did hot and cold, and was
Yeah.
like, this is remarkable. And I didn't work out almost the whole time.
This is drugs without the expense.
Yes.
And the
negative
negative consequences.
Yes. And I didn't work out for like 2 weeks while I was there, and I didn't lose any gains pretty much. I mean, you're going to, but like it really like prevented muscle loss, and so I was like, got to get a sauna. And so he's installing my sauna. It's on like a deck, which like on one side is probably a foot off the ground, and on the other side is probably 3 feet off the ground. And Kenny he was 76 then, I think. He like is going to hook it up and like runs off the side of the deck, jumps and lands on the ground like, like
like a cat.
Like a cat,
Yeah.
and then and doesn't like look back at me like, did you see that?
Yeah.
Just as like, that's how he operates.
I did that in
Yeah.
Nam. I can do that
right.
here.
Totally. And so I was like, that is what I want to do at 77 years old. And he works almost every day.
Yeah.
8 hours a day.
Yeah. Or no, not 8 hours.
Yeah.
He's,
right.
He's
up at 4:30.
sometimes.
Does
Yeah.
push-ups every morning. Like he doesn't eat a bad thing. Doesn't drink. Doesn't smoke. And he is a huge inspiration for me and influence on me. He stops in and checks on me. He makes sure my priorities are right. Like I wouldn't buy anything that there are a few people that like when I think about buying things, I don't buy them if I think that person would judge me, not because I care about how they think about me as much as I want to be like them. So I'm like, okay,
they make good decisions. I'm going to follow their lead.
I
for
layer
good
their decision making onto my life.
Yeah.
All that to say, the goal is to be like that. So
I think just like when you're in your first half, you have certain people who you look up to, you like to follow, and then you're doing the same thing. And the interesting thing is, in the second half, it's always been that. In the second half, you're not just looking up, you're looking down too. I look at you. I want to be like you.
Right.
I want to be like your brother. I want to be like your sisters.
Yeah.
I want to be like you guys. I want to know what you're experiencing and what you're listening to and what you're reading, because they're aligned with how I want to be.
Right.
And I want to be aligned with you.
Right.
So, it's seeking out not just from the older, but, seek the youth as well.
Yeah. Well, there's so much that you can learn from a younger generation.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that until pretty recently, mostly because you're as a 20-something, you're so disconnected from everyone younger than you, because everyone 22 and under is in school and you don't see them. And then like everyone 22 and up works together, and like they call, the echelon front community calls them young buck, who's me, at 23 joining the family business. And I can't remember what, old timer or something for the person that's been in it forever, and, things shouldn't change and whatever. And there's so much that young buck needs to learn from the person that's been there forever. And there's so much that the person that's been there forever can be like, oh, wow, we should be on this social media platform, or we should start a podcast, or we should be doing whatever, because they don't know what they don't know on either side of the equation.
And to take that another level, that you're talking about basically business there mostly, and in the Jocko world, they're talking a lot about military. And you've got an older commander with a younger enlisted man or whatever it happens to be, and the older guy thinks he knows the right way. The most successful, and what's success in the military operations? Staying alive.
Right.
Coming back.
Yeah,
Everybody coming back.
Right.
And so for that older guy to listen to that younger person who makes a comment that might be contrary to the plan on the fly, can you do that?
Right. Right. Yeah.
That's very similar to, being open in all phases of life to other people.
One thing that I see with the younger generation that like I don't remember it being like that when I was a kid is like fitness. Like fitness has become when I was growing up, it felt like fitness was important to athletes. Like I didn't. Maybe some people worked out that weren't athletes or whatever because they like to, but I feel like that was a very small population. And maybe it's just because it's like what I'm exposed to on social media or whatever. But I'm constantly amazed at high schoolers, Gen Z, young college kids that are like really into fitness just because. And that to me is like, wow, I'm going to learn from them that like this is not like, oh, I do jiu-jitsu or I surf or I snowboard and skateboard, and so I want to be strong because of that. Like, they're just into it.
Mm-hmm.
They're just, like, doing the thing because they know the health benefits. It helps them with, their mood or whatever the reason is. It could be totally in vain or a vanity thing. It doesn't matter. I don't care. Like, it's a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm, like, learning from that generation of, like, wow, they just, like, do fitness. Every generation before has probably done less fitness than the next generation. But I just think that's something I'm really gaining from them. And then the other thing that I remember when I was 22, I thought, like, I know everything, and I still think that in some ways, and know I'm wrong. And now I know I'm wrong. But they, like, believe that you can change the world. Like, that's what you get out of a 22-year-old is, like, we can change the world. We can, like, make this technology better. We can sell this product in ways that we're not, like, let's start a podcast or now I, like, kind of, like, have to, like, tread, scared to do that kind of thing versus at 22, I was like, let's get a drone, let's do this, let's do that, like this social media, that, blow it all up kind of thing. And now I'm starting to notice that I'm, like, more cautious and like, well, should we be on TikTok? I don't know, like evaluate it versus if I was 22, I'd be like, why are we not on TikTok?
Yeah.
And that doesn't matter. It's neither here nor there. But what I get from the younger generation is like, they just go for it. And like, at some point you're no longer in that group and you need to look at that group and be like, oh yeah, I need to be more like that.
Absolutely. Because you'll lose so much creativity and ability to change the world.
Mm-hmm.
And how much influence do you have on changing the world when you're 22? Okay, 1% of the 22-year-olds or less will really have an impact on changing the world.
Mm-hmm.
That certainly has happened, and it will happen. It will continue to happen. The number of people who are 50 or older that can have that impact, it's just compound interest.
Right.
Because of experience and other things. And those people's ability to have that philosophy of I am going to change the world, one way or the other.
Yeah. Do you have any other thoughts about this?
I guess a couple of other things are that your life is really a candle burning, and how bright is that candle going to burn? And as the wax starts to fall, the candle still burns as bright as it did in the beginning. However, you have to protect the flame, and you've got to keep it burning bright, because the brightness of your candle is what other people see, and it's what they will light their flame from to carry on and pass to others. And we have, there's really 4 generations that we're impacting. And after that, so you look at the 4 that I'm in. After my 4th goes away, I'm forgotten.
Right. Yeah.
It might be. How often do you hear talk of your great, great, great grandfather?
Never.
Never.
I don't know anything.
It's not
about
heard.
him. Yeah.
However, again, compound interest. How has the impact of your great, great grandfather impacted you?
Hugely.
And then how will you, when you are a great, great grandfather, have influenced the generations before you?
Right.
It's a tremendous opportunity.
Yeah.
It's not a burden.
Right.
It's a tremendous opportunity.
Right. Well, I would post on Facebook about the 14th episode that we did, humility, and like tagged you, and like everyone on Facebook is like where 50 somethings hang out, like 50 plus, and it was like a long sappy rant basically, and and like people are just like commenting like crazy. It's just like I'm always blown away that like when you engage people in the right place at the right time with the right thing, like it goes crazy. And then if you just like put something else out there that's not the right place, time, and people, it like nothing happens. But what I said in the post was, the reason I wanted to do this podcast, I've been wanting to do one with you forever, not necessarily with you, but you do one and I'll help you. It's worked out that I'm on it more than we're going to have more guests and whatever. But the reason I wanted to do it was I was like, Dad, so many people want to spend time with you. You're such a magnetic person. People love to be around you. And you can only be in one place at a time. If we send you to an appointment or to a lunch with someone, like you can't be at the opposite place at the same time or spending time with your family or whatever. And I was like, man, we can do this at scale where people get to spend time with you. One person is in Maine, another's in California. Someone's driving, someone's at work, someone's, at home and their family's away for the weekend and they get to spend an hour with you, which is such a blessing to them. And it doesn't cost you anything. All you had to do was sit down and talk with me or someone else or just yourself. So why not do that? And then the other thing that I said was, since your accident happened almost 10 years ago, like to me, that was my halftime where I was like, oh, this is not guaranteed. And I had a friend in college who died on a motorcycle. And that to me was the first time I ever felt like, oh, like once you're gone, you're gone. Like whatever happens after. But like for people for the next, like I was 20, let's say I live 80 years, that person's not going to be there. Not going to get to call that person, not going to get to see that person, hug that person, whatever. Then your accident happened, probably a couple years after that. And I realized like, okay, it can't just happen to a friend. It could happen to a family member. And I got a second chance. So it was weird because it was like, what would I have said to that person? Well, now I get to say it. Versus in the other situation, it's like too late. Wish I said it. But with the redo kind of situation, it's like, okay, now you get to be at my wedding. You get to like hopefully hold my kids. You get to sit down and have a conversation about business or marriage or whatever, impart some wisdom to me. But now that we're doing this, I'm like, we get this recorded, it's there forever, sort of, hopefully. But like you asked, what impact did your great-great-grandfather have on you? I don't even know his name. Mm-hmm. And I know that my great-great-great-grandchildren may not know my name, and that's okay. That's like honestly kind of liberating because it's like, whew, like if I mess up, it's gonna affect them, but not that much. And if I do good, yeah, it'll affect them, but I can't take credit for much. But I was thinking like, oh man, my grandchildren or great-grandchildren might get to know you because we've captured you, recorded it, and put it in the future. Like that, they won't have to use their imagination as much as I have to use my imagination about Binky's dad or my namesake.
Because all there are the stories.
Right. It's like, oh, he was such a great guy. Oh, everyone knew him. Oh, this, that, or the other thing.
And you look at it. I mean, think about that for a second. The stories of old, we know because they were told and then they were written. Mm-hmm. And that was the format. Mm-hmm. And in today's world, yes, there's the written story, but there's also this type of, recordings or whatever you want to call them that we expect will live on. And, you think about the history of the Bible. I mean, back to the beginning of time, and that story has continued to go on.
Right.
And it's
just
amazing.
There were probably more stories. Like, there were definitely more stories mm-hmm. than survived. Which ones survived? The best ones. Mm-hmm. The ones that carried the most dense amount of meaning in them. I mean, Cain and Abel, like, one of the oldest stories and traditions ever. Mm. Well, why? Because, like, that's humanity summed up in a story, or a piece of humanity summed up in a story. Okay, we record thousands of hours of interviews with you and, like what's going to survive. Okay, yeah, they probably won't have the entire library of Rick Bisson, but like there might be a few videos that survive 100 years. I mean, there's videos of people like Zig Ziglar and, these like great philosophers from, Marcus Aurelius, like was a Stoic, philosopher. Like his he probably wrote a lot more than survived, but like, and I've only heard a little bit of him, but like what I've heard from him has impacted me a ton. And so for me, it's like, okay, well, let's get this, recorded so that, and it makes me kind of like feverish and like, okay, who else can we have in here that like I really want to like capture that person so that they're there forever. I mean, Jim Coffin, that was like, gosh, since I met Jim, I've been like, this guy needs a podcast, this guy needs to like have his essence captured so that like forever people can experience what it was like to know Jim Coffin.
Spread his seeds.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and I think, I'm humbled by those thoughts, and yet, who am I? I am the sum of the people that I have been with, exposed to, throughout all the different quarters, let's say, of my life. And, they have compounded me, to carry that along to who I am today. And, I what I'm sharing is parts of them that I saw as good and, ways to make people be the best to help me be the best that I can be. And now in my second half, I see that as an opportunity to perhaps spur people along to really consider what is their best self and how can they become that.
Right. I used to see the podcast medium as like, oh, okay, there's like 10 people that have podcasts like that are like infinitely more successful than others, which is
the major networks, you could call them.
Well, yeah, it's the Pareto principle playing itself out, that like 1% of people have most of the money, 1% of musicians, have the attention of all the audience. I mean, there's probably billions of musicians out there, and like most people listen to, the same 100 artists. And that's true about podcasts too. And I used to think about podcasts like anyone that's making a podcast is trying to get in that 1%. But like there are people that just make music to make music. They make music because they enjoy it, and they make music because other people enjoy it. And so when I started thinking about podcasts like that, or writing like that, or whatever it is, art is the same way. Like I was kind of the limiting. So someone said to me at one point, they said, everyone has a podcast nowadays, kind of like disdainfully. Yeah, sure. Like, who do they think they are? Everyone has a podcast. And I kind of like let that affect me, and like that was in the back of my head, is like, yeah, I shouldn't start a podcast because...
The good idea, fire department.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Dousing the fire of enthusiasm.
And then once I started seeing it more like music or art or whatever, or playing pickup soccer. My brother-in-law loves pickup soccer. It's like, that's like so fun for him and so cool that he does that. Like, I do jiu-jitsu. Am I going to be a world champion, grappler? No. Like, am I going to be a world champion surfer? No. But I enjoy it. No one's like, man, you shouldn't surf. You're not going to be Mick Fanning or Kelly Slater or whoever. It's like, no, people just let me surf. They're like, you're an idiot, but good for you. It's freezing. What are you doing? But so with the podcast, it's like, okay, and it doesn't have to be a podcast specifically, but writing or putting yourself out there. I have a friend, Lonnie Rowe, who will like write these long form Facebook posts, and
they're excellent.
They're amazing. I mean, he's such a good writer, and it's so from the heart and true and impactful.
It's vulnerable.
Yeah. And it's like, man, like, who's this guy trying to be, is like maybe how some people could see that, but it's like he's just being himself, and I get a lot of value out of it. So like, love that. And same thing here. Like maybe we don't have a huge audience or whatever ever. Okay, well, we're 5 people positively impact. Is it worth it for me to sit down with you, for my grandchildren to have it, to be able to meet you without having met you? And then I would say, tagging on to that, like, I'm sure there are a lot of people out there that feel the way I felt, like, oh, everyone has a podcast, or everyone has a business, or everyone has a nonprofit, or whatever the thing is that's kind of like making you want to do something. But like, okay, but that doesn't matter. Like, make the art, do the thing, make the music, build the business, because it's important to you. And if you help a few other people in their life with a product or a service or a nonprofit or a written piece or a spoken word or whatever, like, you have not just a right to do that, but a responsibility to do that, because those people need your value. And when I started thinking about it that way, of like, okay, I need to get my dad into people's phones, into their ears, because they want to spend time with him. Why am I denying him that by not recording this? So that's just me ranting to say that if you're sitting on an idea or you're sitting on a project, that you should start, because it's going to be really ugly at first, and it was for us.
Yeah,
but it's got a lot better.
And I would also say that, I have wanted to put. I've done things earlier that would perhaps encapsulate, my thoughts, because I wanted it to last. And not out of vain. It was, I want people to live a good life. So I'm going to pass this message along. And I'm primarily talking about, at that point in time, it was you kids. Now it's grandchildren. And maybe when you get in your second half, you're more about, you just want anybody. More,
Right.
You want to spread that even further. And, I write, in a journal, and I'll listen to podcasts about people writing books, and I'm encouraged by that. I'm enthused by that. That's laborious for me. And I don't have, the way I feel right now, where I'm at, I don't have the time to do that, to get to tell people what I want to tell them. And this has just created a tremendous opportunity and blessing to say, okay, if people, whether they want to listen or not, these are the things that I find important. And my goal, is for people to know that there's a door there to be knocked on, and it will be opened. And just step in.
I think we'll stop there.
Love you, Benjamin.
Love you too.
Thanks.